Today we're going to be talking about congressional deal making, and it's hard to be happy about this one. It's pretty easy to be cynical, and if I come across that way, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure what else to do. And as your textbook's going to point out, these are some of your vocab words, but my job is to educate you on the state of how things are, not necessarily on the state of how we'd want them to be. So, on we go. All right, first thing here is it's going to talk about something called pork. Now, this is not like, something you'd buy in the store, but it refers to something called pork barrel politics. A lot of our references to political actions come from an era when things were very agrarian in America. People lived in very rural settings, and so, in the early 1800s, they were referring to their politicians in these ways. So what farmers would do is they would come out and they would pour a bunch of food into a trough, and all the pigs would swarm in and fight over it. And so the barrel of food and the pork, the pigs, coming in to fight over it, this was thought of as pork barrel politics. Because what people thought is that the congressmen were basically descending on Washington, D.C. and trying to grab as much stuff as they could. And that's literally what it refers to. Now, they believe, and maybe this is the fault of the American people for wanting this, but politicians believe that the more money they can grab in Washington, D.C. and take home to their home district, the more likely they are to get elected. And so we can debate whether it's their preferences or whether it's the American people's morality that says that's the whole point of government, is to go grab money and bring it home to you, almost like you're legally pillaging the country. But there it is, okay? So pork is any time that a congressman grabs money in Washington, D.C. and ships it to their home state or their home district and then celebrates like, hey, look at all what I got for you, so elect me. For example, like military bases will have a lot of money brought in from the outside to have that military base, and then all the people servicing all those people there, equipment and everything, so building things, construction jobs, restaurant jobs, all those kind of things will occur, and that'll increase the economy of their home district. So Congress people are thought of as bringing home pork, or bringing home the bacon, so to speak, as doing this kind of thing. Usually it's not really necessary. For example, there was a bridge built, I think, in Ketchikan, Alaska. It was out to an island that had no one living on it. It was known as the Bridge to Nowhere. So it created a lot of jobs, but it didn't result in anything useful. They built a bridge out to nothing. Okay? And those are the kind of things that will often come up. That is known as pork. Okay? In Oregon, we see this where, I've brought home lots of money for national forests, and I've brought home lots of money for interstate highway funds, and all kind of things like that. So you'll see senators and representatives bragging about these things. But you got to think it through. Like, were these necessary things? Were they good? Were they on whole beneficial compared to the cost? Or was it just money I grabbed by making deals to bring home to you? Okay, so that's going to come up on the test. I need to understand what pork is. The second sort of agrarian concept is called log rolling. So our founding fathers believed that the Congress would get together and as a whole debate things and then come to a conclusion about a law, and that one law would be passed. But quickly in the early 1800s, senators and representatives found that you could pass a lot more laws if you did something called log rolling. So normally when woodcutters would cut the logs, they'd send them down the flume and they'd land in the lake and they'd bind them together into big rafts, and there'd be all these logs stacked next to each other. Well, the lumberjacks would, when they were binding them together, one log would start rolling over here and it would hit the next log and the next and the next and the next, and pretty soon all the logs were rolling across the lake there. They had to wait for them to calm down before they could bind them together, okay? So this is what senators and representatives do. They say, look, I really would love you to vote for my farm bill in Iowa. And the senator from New York says, well, I want you to vote for my construction bill in New York. And the senator from Florida says, well, I really want you to build a seawall in Florida. And they all look at each other and say, I'll vote for yours if you vote for mine. And so I'll roll over on yours if you roll over on mine and mine and mine. And pretty soon you've got all 100 senators have all voted for each other's laws. And now you've got 100 laws that came about. And the deal was that they were rolling over, each of them on each other's bills. So the log rolling was just a deal for the whole Senate or the whole House of Representatives to just pass the same thing for each person, and then we all get what we want and we all go home happy. Now, does the taxpayer go home happy? Well, it doesn't seem that the taxpayer is very well represented in this sort of situation. It's more about the senators or representatives getting what they want. And now you understand how we can come to be $27 trillion in debt. Okay? So that's called log rolling. Another way this results is something called a Christmas tree bill. So every year Congress is supposed to pass the budget. And it's pretty well expected that that needs to pass. And so what happens is the budget is put forward by the Financial Committee, but every other senator and representative attaches another thing to it. So these attachments are known as riders. So the main bill is coming through, but they will attach a rider to the bill, and they will ride along as this goes through the process of being voted on. And the reason they call it a Christmas tree bill is because everyone puts all these riders on there, and they're expecting, well, you're going to pass the budget, so I'll just put on a thing that says, paint supply companies get a double tax write-off in Alabama. And it just so happens my brother owns an industrial paint company in Alabama. And so that's how they put these little things into the tax code. They put these little deals in there. And all of these things are riders. And then when Congress votes on the budget to keep the country going, which pretty much happens every year, then it's like Christmas for the senators. Woo, look at all the favors I handed out. Look at all the things I got. All right. And these are known as riders that are put on a bill. And I think the record for the number of riders on one bill was 1,024. Yeah, we're talking a lot of political favors. So you need to understand that, like, when I look at the Oregon tax code, it used to have one page, and I could fill out my taxes 20 years ago. The Oregon tax code now has 7 pages that I have to fill out every year. And the reason for this is there's so many riders that have been attached to these bills that political favors are being handed out everywhere. I mean, you own a mobile home park, you get a special tax break. You own a drive-up theater, you get a special tax break. I mean, how many drive-up theaters are there? So it's pretty specific, these things being handed out. So, yeah, there is a lot of favors being given here and there, and those are known as Christmas tree bills because it's all the good stuff for the senator. Is the taxpayer thinking about it that way? So consider that. Okay? So these are some of the words from your book there, pork, log rolling, Christmas tree bill, and a rider. You need to understand how those work. All right. Now we get really into it. So, these days, who actually writes the legislation? It might surprise you, but our congressional people do not actually write most of the laws that they argue for passing. It's pretty far removed from democracy. So what happens these days in the last 2 decades, 3 decades, what's been growing is that special interest groups write the legislation. So the National Rifle Association, the American Association of Retired Persons, these are 2 special interest lobby groups. The pharmaceutical companies will form their own lobby group. Military industrial complex groups will come forward and say, here's what we want, here's what we want. And a lobbyist is someone who comes and presents information to a congressperson. So they will say, hey, you really ought to do this for these reasons. Here's my report. I'd love for you to read it. Be cool, wouldn't it? Oh, and by the way, we contributed an awful lot to your campaign fund. So I really insist that you read it. Okay? So that's pretty much how these deals work. So special interest groups actually hire lawyers to craft the legislation that they want to have passed. And they hand it to the representatives and senators and say, we've had your back in several elections here. We've given a lot to your super PACs, your political action committees, and what we'd really like is for you to put forward this legislation right here. And oftentimes, it is sad to say that the senator or representative does not even read it. They know generally what's in there, but they do not actually read the legislation. Okay? The people who do are known as staffers. So it turns out that Congress has set aside a lot of money so that every congressperson has many staffers working for them. So these are paid professionals that are assigned to each senator and representative. And we're talking like 40 to 60 different people who are the specialists for every senator and representative. So they're there whether the senator or representative is elected or not. These people don't come and go like the officials. They're just there as a career staffer, and they're expert on pharmacology or nuclear arms or military hardware or agricultural supplies, And so that's why they'll have 40 in the House per person to 60 in the House per senator, because the staffers are the ones that are advising the elected official. Yes, these people know what's going on far more than their bosses, the actually elected people by the country. Okay? So they come and they advise the senator or representative how to vote and what's in the bill. So the staffers are the ones that link up with the special interests. The special interests craft the legislation. They hand it over to the staffer and they say, remember, we helped Senator so-and-so quite a bit with our, super PAC money. We'd really like to see this passed. And there's always been the question as to, does the staffer get something? Because if you're ever going to bribe someone, there's no point in bribing the congressperson. I'll talk about how that works later. The real bribes are handed out right here. Because the staffer is not paid terribly much, but this is certainly a lot of influence that can be peddled here, because the special interest gives the legislation to the staffer, who then hands it to the representative and says, this is what we should do. And the representative says, okay. And there's no real question about what's in it. Is this good for the country? What it really is this good for my political designs or desires? And unfortunately, that's where we've landed. Okay? So oftentimes these lobbyists are corporate interest groups because they're the ones with the most money. And they hand over pre-written bills to the Congress people. They hand over these pre-written bills, and it is the legislator's job to get elected. Okay? It is the legislator's job to get elected. So the legislators have happy faces, slick styles. Hey, I'm your politician, vote for me. That's the kind of thing that they do. They bring to the table. They get elected. They then talk a good talk. They make good statements. They're statespersons. They convince America that this is the right thing to do. They get dollars thrown at them in their super PACs for getting reelected. They get the power, the prestige, and quite a bit of money, as we'll find out. The special interest groups get what they want. The staffers get what they want. And so We have this nice triangular pattern that seems to occur. Now, the beauty of this from the corporate interest standpoint is it doesn't really matter who gets elected. In fact, most corporations will actually give a lot of money to both a Republican and a Democratic candidate in the same election. Like, we'll give $1 million to each of them because they'll be sort of our person no matter who gets elected. It's irrelevant to the corporation. And so a lot of these arguments about Democrat, Republican, the corporations go, we'll just buy them both. Okay? So unfortunately, that's the sad truth, but that's what goes on with the corporate interests. And they see legislators' job as getting elected. Okay? And that's how you can get the legislation crafted the way you want. You just got to spend some dollars doing it, and then there it is. The staffers, however, are more permanent. So these special interests develop good relationships with the staffers because they're the ones that move the bills in front of the legislators from the special interests. So they take it from the special interest and say, here you go, Senator, this is the bill you should pass. That really make a name for yourself. This is the good thing here. Okay? It'll result in some pork from your district. It'll make the other senators happy for these reasons. And it'll get you, a lot more money in your super PAC next time you run for office. And the senator says, well, sign me up. Okay? So what's missing here, and Alexis de Tocqueville noticed this back in, I believe, 1793 when he wrote his book on democracy. He traveled through America and he studied it and he said, hey, here's the deal. This American experiment, this democracy that they're going to try and instill, will work as long as the American people are good. Okay? America will be great as long as the people are good. When the people cease to be good, America will cease to be great. And then his next sentence was very telling. He said, because when the people realize they can vote themselves money from the public treasury, that's the beginning of the end. Okay? So once we start simply using government and co-opting it for our own private interests, you don't have a democracy anymore. What you have is something called crony capitalism. So it's a capitalistic market where you have the freedom to buy, sell, and trade, but it's sort of run by this oligarchy of a small group of people, is what the oligarchy is, that really control things for their own means and their own ends. And so that's what the cronyism is. The idea that we are the elites, the select people who can take advantage of the system. We can take advantage and you can't. And once that starts to develop, as de Tocqueville said, we got real problems. So if we really wanted to dive into this in class, we'd talk about this being sort of the beginning of the end of the Republic. And this same kind of thing happened in Rome, and we seem to be headed down that same sort of path as the Romans. So we have sort of a facade of democracy, a veneer. It's very, surfacey. It looks like, hey, everyone's vote counts, everyone's vote matters, when really it doesn't matter if you elect a Democrat or Republican if both are being bought off. Okay? So that's really sad. But what can we do about this? John McCain stood up and yelled at all his congressional fellows and women and men there that said, hey, this writer thing has to stop. And so they have cut back on that quite a bit. However, what they really need to do is pass laws that just don't allow for writers. But they don't want to do that. And they really should pass laws called campaign reform. Everyone always talks about it. Oh, we need campaign reform. But they would be cutting off their own dollars from the special interest groups to do so. And Congress won't do it. So I think what it's really going to take is the American people in a constitutional convention passing amendments that limit these kind of things. Do the American people have the morality, the goodness, as Alexis de Tocqueville said, to pass such amendments, to enforce upon their own leaders and themselves the idea that I will not simply raid the public treasury for my own benefit? Can Americans do that? If you go to another famous political science philosopher, Friedrich Bastiat, in his book The Law, it's like required reading for Political Science 101. In there, Friedrich Bastiat said, when a nation's laws become legalizing plunder, pork, log rolling, Christmas tree bills, when it becomes legalized that you can plunder your neighbors or the public treasury, then you have entered a very bad phase of your system of government, because now all the machinery of government is aimed at theft being legalized. And that's a very bad sign. So we're at that tipping point. So if it looks like things are coming apart at the seams in America, if it looks like these elections are really contentious, there's a reason for that. Part of the reason is it's a bunch of cronies fighting over who gets to control government so that they can raid it. Let us plunder it. No, let us plunder it. Will the American people stop with the idea of plunder? Will we adopt actual property rights? Will we stop this kind of thing with some constitutional amendments? So it remains to be seen, and it'll determine the fate of our country, I think, because we cannot borrow money infinitely. We're 27 trillion in debt. I don't see any way of paying that off. Right? There's a few ways, but they're all going to hurt. So do Americans have it to say, yeah, we shouldn't have done that, and go back and fix that? Or are we just going to continue until it breaks? So when we talk about inequities, unfairness, elitism, those kind of things, yeah, they absolutely exist. They're right here. And we're going to talk about this more in class. So we're going to watch an episode by 60 Minutes, news organization that did an expose on this. Both Republicans and Democrats are profiting heavily from this. When people go to Congress, they leave as millionaires. There are a lot of rich people in Congress, and they didn't come with the money, they're leaving with the money. So 60 Minutes shows how that's able to be done, because the rules are applied selectively. Things that you and I can't do, like insider trading, are actually legal for Congress to do. And so that's the way they do this. So congressional people are never bribed outright. That would be just way too easy and to be caught. But if you offer your senator or representative a bunch of stock in your company, and then they pass a bill that makes it go up, they've benefited themselves and the company, see? And that's what 60 Minutes is pointing out, is this kind of insider trading can happen again and again and again, and the longer you're in Congress, the richer you become. And so you look at the long-time people in Congress, you're going to find there's a lot of wealth there. They don't spend $5 million to get a job that pays $150,000. They spend $5 million because the job on the side pays $10 million. And then there's the book deals, and then there's the speaking fees. Like if you do a company a favor, you just go around and speak at their company, and they say, oh, thank you so much. Would you accept this $100,000? And you're like, well, sure. I'm not a congressperson anymore. I was not elected this year, but... So there's 1,000 ways to make a deal, okay? And that's why most of our representatives and senators write a book and go on a speaking tour. You'll notice Bill Clinton has done this. President Obama has done this. I'm sure Donald Trump will do this when and if he's not president anymore, and on and on and on. Okay? So this is sort of the situation we have. Will we continue it, or will we change it? Because right now, if you look at the 10 richest counties in America, of the 10 richest counties in America, 6 of them are in Washington, D.C. They're just the suburbs of Washington, D.C., because that's where all this money is flowing into. Right? So, as a country, we're going to have to get a handle on that. Otherwise, we're going to increasingly look like some third world nation that's simply corrupt. We're headed that direction, and we'll see which way American people decide. So think about that in these elections. It's not just a Democrat, Republican. People might choose complete outsiders, That's why you're seeing the rise of people like Bernie Sanders as an independent candidate, Donald Trump, who's never held office ever before. People are looking to get away from these kind of systems. They don't want career politicians that have been bought already. They want people who are totally new and totally fresh. And so the American people are trying, I think, to do that. I'm not sure they realize how entrenched this is. So we'll see. A constitutional convention, hopefully, and not anything worse. Okay, we'll talk about it in class.